Hey guys, today I'm gonna go over some breathing patterns. We're gonna use the barbell back squat as the example. It could be a bicep curl, it could be a few other things, deadlift, but your pattern of breath is really determined by a few things, your posture, all these sort of things. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna break down our way through it, because I like to, it's the warm up. Like your warm up has nothing to do with your body temperature, nothing at all. It has to do with your nervous system and its activation or whatever that might be. And if we're squatting out a pattern, then this position is gonna force a certain breath pattern. A good posture is gonna allow for a different breath pattern. And that's what we're trying to experience. So, because if you're squatting like this, it doesn't matter how you're gonna try to breathe, because you'll never ever breathe properly. Because this is not gonna, with this arch, you can't breathe. Ideally, as long as you're human. So it's not up for debate, just to be super clear. This is not up for debate. You'll never breathe here any better than you'll ever breathe neutral, okay, for any circumstance. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna show you my back squat. So before we get into the minutia of the back squat is, I don't descend this bar until I have a breath pattern, number one. So I'm gonna unrack this bar. What I'm going to do first is I'm gonna unrack this bar. My first 3 sets are 3 breaths to get neutral. So I'm gonna hold this bar in which I plan on descending it, but before I do any of that, I'm gonna long breath, long inhale. I'm gonna do 3 of them, right? Because what we find is most people will unrack the squat bar and be like, okay, I'm ready, right? Now I'm gonna try to descend the bar from no wonder why I can't squat. I'm descending the bar with this posture. So after breathing, eventually to neutral, I'll get to here, neutral. And so I can go into my hip tilt and I can descend. So that's your first practice or your first red flag. If you can't get out of this posture, you will never, ever, ever squat properly, not a single rep. Or bicep curl or deadlift or shoot a gun. So we're using this as the example of action, regardless of the exercise, but this is a good example. So once I've done my 3 sets of 3 breaths, now I'm gonna go, okay, I've acquired the posture in which now my legs can receive, right? If I'm out of posture, my legs are trying to receive this guy. So we're not trying to do that. The breathing is what allows for that posture to come. Maybe 3 breaths, maybe 5, maybe 10. It doesn't matter, but you're feeling it, okay? So once I've got my 3 sets of 3 breaths, I'm gonna start unracking and start my descent. And that process is really, really straightforward, that breathing process. The rule is you never, ever, ever, ever want to breathe at the point of greatest need. The point of greatest need is at the top, when I brace and move, and at the bottom where I change direction. So one thing I don't want to do is, I don't want to be in my descent and trying to find breath. You have to acquire position before you go into locomotion, okay? So that's what we'll do is I'm going to take, before I descend, I've got my good breaths to get my posture again, maybe 3, maybe 5. And once I feel like I'm under my bar, my neck is back, long inhale. At the top of that inhale, I'm basically in a shrug, and then I'm gonna go opposite of shrug, flex down into the bar, hinge, descend, back to the top, and then I begin to pursing my exhale into my glute contraction there at the same time. So at no point, again, I want you to say, at no point, right, there's a point when I jump, I get to this position, whether I have a bar in my hand or I'm on a squat rack. That's my position of power. I need to have taken my breath from here to here. Somewhere in that range, I have to get all of my air in, because once I get past that position of power, whatever I have as far as breath and tension, I'm gonna take that with me all the way to the bottom. So if I've cut my breath short, I've gasped, or I've gone into a breath and held my shrug, I'm gonna have a hard time going down, okay? So what we're gonna do is, once I take that big breath, flex into my body, air lat, but I'm holding onto a bar. Then I go into a hinge, from that air lat, hinge, all the time holding my breath. Flex, hinge, descend. Hold my breath, hold my breath, hold my breath. I get to that position of power and I don't thoracic dump. I don't go, I don't dump all of my air, because then I'm going to that position of power and that point of greatest need, I don't want to dump that air. It's like I'm holding my gun and creating tension. The same idea as I ascend, tension, tension, and I'm not dumping my air, I'm flexing into getting tall. So when I get tall, okay, so now I'm tall, I've come to the top, glutes fire the same time I'm exhaling. Why? Because now my glutes are fired, I'm tall, oh, I can breathe. When my glutes are tired, when my glutes are fired and I'm not arched, man, I can breathe all day, right? That's the idea. So now here's my rhythm. Big inhale, flex down, start my locomotion. Flex, repeat. And so on. Okay, there's a rhythm to it that we're gonna try to find, because what we say is the cadence of our breath, like, or whatever happens in the set range, whatever happens during the set, whatever it is, what we're trying to do in that is to not lose stability. So we're not gasping for air. And when we practice this good, inhale, brace, move, exhale, inhale, brace, move. You'll see this rhythm that starts happening. And in that rhythm, what ends up happening is sometimes you get to the top and I'm gonna take 2 breaths, maybe 3, maybe 5. The number of your breaths is where you're cleansing yourself. Like we're not watching time. What's my rest period in between my racks? It's the number of breaths. Same thing, when I'm doing laps, I'm swimming my 500 side stroke. How do we improve our stroke? It's improve our breath rate per 25. It's the same idea in here. If we're out of breath and gasping and bracing and dumping, or we're doing thoracic dumps, our body's always trying to get stable. But if my breath rate is always pop, 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 right? It's going to be something that, again, your respiratory pause, that's when we shoot. Pop, right? We are gonna shoot at the respiratory pause. Same idea, we're trying to get up to the top, breathe, not there yet. Breathe, not there yet. Breathe, and so on. And then we're gonna get the mechanics in a future video about, like, okay, when do I nose, mouth, nose, mouth, all that sort of stuff. But before we get into that, it's just like we need to get you setting up your pattern. That's it. So before we can say this is exactly type of, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, 6 in, 6 out, all these sort of types of breathing, we don't add a particular type of breathing until somebody is starting to create a cadence to their movements. Then it makes sense, because it's like, hey, I'm learning the squat and still can't breathe. No, let's start getting into the squat, familiar with it. Then we add breath work, right? And that improves the squat. And then once we get this pattern, what I'm saying by pattern is each person, once they've done enough squats and start working their breath, they've got their own little batting stance, just like baseball does. That's what I mean. Everyone's kind of got their own flavor, and we want that. A little bit of style, a little bit of each person's little movement pattern issues. But essentially, they'll get into this breath pattern and flow. And then, based on how they're able to breathe and what they're doing, we can start changing the breath patterns a little bit. Okay? We're not changing breath patterns to make things difficult necessarily. We're changing the breath patterns to assimilate what's going on. Because you're going to find that a squat might be different than a bicep curl in terms of its frequency, but the patterning is going to be the same. And you're gonna find the same thing on the gun, right? You're at buds, you're at selection, you're in line doing push-ups, everyone's screaming, all that sort of stuff. Chaos, chaos. Can I reorganize that chaos? And it's through the breath work, all that. So Be looking out some more videos. We're gonna break down some more specific, nose, mouth, nose, mouth situation. And then we'll get into one about sleep and down regulation, things like that. But right now, squatting is because of the range of motion and the setup, there's a lot going on here. So this is a great exercise in which we begin to build our breath pattern off of. Because we're not doing tons of bicep curls like, I'm out of breath. The rep, rest scenario of this gives us a great place to begin practicing. So check out the squat, right? When you're gonna do your breathing, really focus on that in your position, and you'll see how position and breath work are directly correlated to better everything. So give it a shot.